If you are watching this, you are in my speech class at Christian Educational Consortium, or maybe you're watching it for some other reason, which is fine. But anyway, I know we had a little bit of some technical difficulties the other day, and so I wanted to do this and said I would put this up this weekend, and this will give you an opportunity to review the stuff from the chapter 2 lesson, and I will get that recorded. And as long as we have any difficulties with the streaming, I'll keep doing this. And what I'm going to do, by the way, just so you know, is I'll keep doing this as needed, and that way you can see it and be able to deal with the material, like you would if it were in class, and actually see the entire lecture. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here, and we'll get rolling with that. And so I'm going to start by talking about the similarities between public speaking and then just ordinary private speech. And some of the similarities in here, the slide, you can see the slide, so I won't overdo it, but credibility, I mean, obviously you want to be a credible person. You want your friends to believe you or your family members to believe you. And so that matters whether you're doing private or public speaking. Now, of course, in private conversation, people typically know more about you. And so you come with a package that you don't come with in public speaking. And so part of the dissimilarity there with credibility is that you want to make sure as a public speaker that you give people reasons to think you're okay. All right, and so you're going to need that, whether that comes through an introduction by the person who's introducing you to the audience, or whether that comes through you giving a very brief introduction, depending on how long your speech is going to be, or something along those lines, but in telling the audience why they should trust you. So, but it matters no matter what, right? You want your friends to believe you, you want your family to believe you, you want anybody in a public speaking venue to believe you, so you care. Organization, I mean, again, there is some organization to private conversations. It obviously, and we'll see in the next slide, it free flows a little more than you would expect in a public speaking event. And in fact, but there nonetheless is always some organization to how you say things. You don't start a story at the end typically, for instance. Now you might, for emphasis, you might say, oh, you're not going to believe what happened. The other day, I killed a snake. And then somebody said, whoa, and then you tell the story. Okay, well, that's fine. But you don't start at the end. I chopped its head off with an axe. I chopped a snake's head off with an axe. What? Right? Well, now you got to tell me the story. Well, then you have to back up. So even in private speech, we want some organization. Clearly in public speaking, and I can't emphasize this enough, and I don't know how if you can see my face and see my shaking, but you got to be organized when you speak in a public speaking venue. Okay, got to be organized. It's exceedingly important. It is probably the single best thing you can do for yourself as a public speaker, is to be organized. If you do that, a whole host of other problems will melt away. Okay, adaptation, that has to do with knowing your audience. Obviously, there's adaptation that occurs in everyday speech, right? We adjust on the fly. If we see our friend is looking at us kind of oddly, we normally say, what's wrong, right? You can't do that as a public speaker. But if you see your audience is veering into crazy land, then maybe you need to do something. One of the things I recommend, and hear me carefully now, again, tell a story about you that is funny, that makes fun of yourself, okay? It's got to be short, particularly depending on how long your speech is, because you can't, now, if you have a 5-minute speech and you lose your audience in 5 minutes, you probably have been very disorganized, because that's not a very long time to speak to people, okay? And so you ought to be able to capture their attention for 4 or 5 minutes. And if you haven't, then your biggest problem in that speech is probably a lack of organization more than anything else, because most people will hang on for 4 or 5 minutes to hear what you have to say about almost anything, especially if they're there on purpose. Okay, and so longer speeches, obviously, you might need to do this. And this is what I would say. Find a funny story. And I think I told you all the story of me trying to jam a basketball, and I jumped off the ladder and grabbed it and, yanked it and broke the backboard off. And it wasn't a real backboard. It was a wooden backboard that had been under the elements, and the rim snapped off, and I ended up on the ground with it on my back and on my chest. I mean, it's not hilarious, but it's a funny story, and it just is kind of silly and stupid. Now, here's what you do. You're losing your audience for whatever reason. Something's going on. You say, that reminds me of a story. And then you tell your story. You pull it out of your back pocket and you tell it, okay? You got to practice the story, and then you tell the story. Well, why do you do that? Because it gets your audience it breaks some ice. So if you're in the middle of your speech and you say, oh, that reminds me, here's the key. You say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with my speech, so why is it reminding me? It's reminding you because you need to get your audience back. So it is reminding you of this silly story that you're going to tell. Okay, even if it has nothing to do with it, don't worry about it. Finally, response. In regular conversation, obviously response is a big deal. Everybody responds. If it's just one-on-one, you respond to each other. If it's a group, you respond to the people in the group, and there's, oh yeah, oh no, yes, no, whoa, yeah, that reminds me. Oh yeah, what about this? And there's kind of that ongoing back and forth. In a public speaking venue, there's still response because, again, similar to adaptation, you see the audience may be responding to you negatively or positively. And that may tell you whether you need to continue or maybe whether you need to pack up and go, right? If they start throwing raw fruit at you, that's probably a good sign you need to get out in a hurry, right? So again, response happens in both. It's much more noticeable, I would say, in a private setting, but it still happens. Now, let's look at some differences. The structure, obviously, I doubt many of you show up with a friend, you pull out your phone and you pull out some, part of your phone and you go, yeah, wow, I've got, I've got the agenda for our conversation today. And you have point 1, where are we going to the movies tonight? Point 2, are we going to eat dinner before or after the movie? Point 3, now you might say those things. And again, see, there's an organizational flow, but you don't have an agenda and you don't have a specific structure. There's a little more free flow to it. If you are public speaking, you have to have structure. I can't say this enough. You're building a building here. You better have a good foundation or it's all going to crumble. All right, so you got to have a structure. Precision, public speaking is usually very specific. Private conversations, again, they ramble. You're just talking about anything. And you just blah, 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 and you just veer off all over the place, okay? And that's fine. Delivery, this is important too. It's not as important as structure and organization, okay? But it's important. Delivery means that you need to be clear and you need to be more conscious of your posture, of your tone, of the pitch of your voice and the volume of your voice, okay? And so you need to modulate those things. Whereas in private conversation, you don't really give any thought to that pretty much. Somebody might say, hey, what? I didn't hear you. And then you have to say something louder. Maybe you're in a crowded place and you have to do that. But otherwise, you don't. And then finally, preparation. Usually when you have a conversation with someone in private, you don't think much ahead necessarily, maybe a little, but for the most part, unless it's something serious, right? And you've kind of planned your speech, because you know that you're going to have to deal with that. I'm sorry, I just got a text message and it's throwing me off. See, look what happens with that. Anyway, preparation is very important, obviously, and you have to be prepared and you have to know what you're going to say when you're in public speaking. You have to have, again, this goes back to structure. You have to plan, you have to practice, and you have to do those things in order to make it work right. And so keep those things in mind. That's a big difference. You don't have to plan to just have a conversation with your friend. One of the ways you can become a better public speaker is through active listening. The slide up there right now. And again, how does this help you? Well, because you ask questions of people, right? And that helps it, and it engages your mind. Even if you are just listening to a speech or maybe a sermon, for instance, you ought to be asking questions of yourself as you're hearing what you're hearing. You ought to be listening carefully enough that it prompts you to ask questions, even if you can't answer them immediately. Almost any time I listen to someone speak, whether it's a sermon on Sunday morning or whether it's a speech of some kind, I like to take notes. And I like to take notes because then it causes me to write down questions. Now, I'm not saying I try to take a transcript of what the person says or that I write everything down or even write out everything they say that's important. I may or may not, but I do like to ask myself questions because then it makes me ponder what they're saying. If you have the option or the ability to interrupt, it's like in a classroom, it's always a good idea to say to the person, when you said X, did you mean Y? In other words, rephrase what the person said and say it back to them, or even say it specifically. You just said that if you are going to be a good public speaker, you have to be organized. Okay, that's what I just said, and you say it back to me. Does that mean this? Does that mean you should write down your speech and read it verbatim? Okay, might be a question, because that would be super organized. All right. And by the way, the answer to that is, well, that depends, right? It depends on what you're doing. If you're giving a speech, typically you're not writing it down verbatim because it's hard to engage with people when you're reading. So ordinarily my answer would be no. You don't want to read it verbatim. Okay. All right. And then finally, analyze what the speaker is saying for content, form, and style. Again, this helps you as you're listening. You can grab onto things you like and say, I like what he or she is doing there. I like how they manage the topic. I like how they use their eyes or their hands or their facial expressions. I liked how they moved around the stage or didn't move around the stage, whatever the case may be. I just enjoyed listening to them for these reasons. I like the voice, the up and down, or the very mild voice, or the decision to use words and silence. Okay, and so again, content, form, style, that'll help you become a better speaker. Self-concept, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is in the book, but I do want to mention it. The self-comparison, the social comparison theory has to do with us comparing ourselves to others or our ideal self or our previous self. The example I gave in class this past week was that when I was in third grade, I was made class president by Mrs. Martin, my third grade teacher. There was no election. She just appointed me. And as we learned about government, I realized that in the year 2000, I would be 37 and eligible to run for president. So in third grade decided, well, obviously, because I was appointed president of my 22-person classroom in third grade, obviously I'm going to be president of the United States in the year 2000. I mean, right? Why wouldn't I be? And so part of me as a little boy in third grade thought, well, why not, right? And I didn't pursue that. So, but again, I could, if I were comparing myself to the past and say, well, what happened to that little guy? What happened to his drive and determination, and why didn't I do that? And then I could get all whacked out about why I didn't do it. Well, you can't do that to yourself, and you can't put yourself up against your ideal self, the perfect you. You can't do that either. And comparing yourself to others you ought to know, I hope you know, is a gigantic waste of time. You are who you are. You have all kinds of qualities and gifts that God has given you, and just you need to use those to the best of your ability and potential. That's what you do with it. If you read in the New Testament and you read many of Paul's letters, one of the things you'll find Paul saying sprinkled throughout is, yeah, you all were chastising me for not being a great orator, right? Especially the Greeks, who loved great oration. That was part of their history and their culture and their social history and their political history. And Paul says, yeah, I'm not the greatest speaker, but I'm telling you the truth, right? And so one of the things he enunciates is, look, I'm serious, I'm telling you the truth, I'm being honest with you, and I'm being careful with you and thoughtful with you, and I pray for you. And so, yeah, maybe I'm not the kind of orator that you would like, but the words that I'm saying are true, and you need to accept them. He didn't worry about whether he was the great. In other words, he wasn't hooked on being the greatest speaker ever. He let the words that he said work within the framework of who he was. Reflective appraisal theory, your self-appraisal depends on what you think other people think of you. Now, this is really dangerous because A, you have no idea what other people are thinking. And you may be surprised, quite candidly, to find out that somebody really likes you a lot and thinks very highly of you, and yet really never shows any indications. And you don't know, and you think, oh, they don't like me, and they really do. They just don't like to say things to people like that, or they, for whatever reason. So don't get too wound up about that. And you can't let that determine how you do what you do. Okay, you've got to take the bundle that is you and maximize everything you have to the best you can. Last, selective self-verification. As I know, that's my personal favorite because I just weed out all the bad stuff about me and just take the good stuff and say, that's me. And we all know that we're a bundle of good and bad qualities, and we have to work with the good and emphasize them as much as possible, especially in public speaking. But we have to minimize the bad. If you're somebody who likes to use their hands and you can't control your hands and they're going all over the place, right? And you're just doing this because you just don't know what to do, or worse, quite candidly, you just ram your hands in your pockets and you stand there like rigid at attention, like an army drill sergeant is, busting your chops. Okay, neither of those is good. You have to learn, well, how do I take the good, right? So if you're somebody who uses your hands, but you use them way too much, okay, the good is that you're using your hands. And you're making gestures when you're speaking, and you're using those gestures to help communicate, right, the idea. Well, that's good, but you got to get control of it, okay? If you're someone who's rigid and you don't want to use your hands much or at all, then the good thing is that you're not being wacky and crazy and people are focused on your words, but then you've got to at least relax and learn to relax a little bit. Okay, and so you can't weed out and say, well, I don't have my hands, going crazy, and so that's really good. Well, yeah, but you're not doing anything. That's not as good. Okay, weed out the bad. Imago Dei, that's the image of God, and whether you're a Christian or not, God sees you as a human being who's made in His image, and that's a powerful thing. If you are a Christian, look, whatever you look like, whatever you are, whatever the bundle of you that is, God sees Christ every time He looks at you, and that's a powerful thing to think about. That would give you incredible, incredible confidence to know that in front of the God of the universe, He sees Christ. Even if you're not a Christian, He still sees a human being made in His image, and God cares about that, and so it matters to Him what you're doing. And so keep that in mind as you're speaking. All right, so which is worse, right? Being overconfident or overconcerned, right? Those are two. Obviously, you want to be in the middle. You want to be confident, but not overconfident. You want to be concerned, but not overconcerned. And why? Well, and you can see the slide and the things that I've said here. Overconfident people tend to be less prepared. Overconcerned people never seem to feel prepared. And it doesn't matter which you are, it's going to impact how you deliver a speech. If you feel less prepared, if you are in fact less prepared, your speech isn't going to be very good. I don't care how great a speaker you are. I don't care how good an orator you are. I don't care how mellifluous your tones are. I don't care if you've got the greatest voice that ever spoke a word into human ears, okay? If you're not prepared, it's not going to matter. And if you never feel prepared, then you're never going to feel like you're ready. It's going to impact you because you're always going to be second guessing yourself even while you're speaking. And that's no good either, because that's going to ruin the speech, because you'll constantly be spending time. Did I just say, oh my goodness, goodness, did I just say that? Did I do this? Did I do this? Oh no, did I do the wrong hand gesture? Did I say the thing in the wrong way? You can't do that to yourself either. Obviously, neither one of those is good. Whether you're overconfident or overconcerned, guess what? You tend to procrastinate. Those who are overconfident procrastinate because they're like, it's me. I've got this. I mean, why wouldn't I, right? I mean, yeah, I'm really not going to worry about it. Well, I'll just put it off because it doesn't matter. I can just handle this. That shows up. Okay. Overconcerned people procrastinate out of fear. I can't do this. I'm never going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to handle it. I don't know what to do. And so they don't do it. And then when they don't do, right, obviously you're not going to be ready. The best way to handle procrastination is to bite off little chunks of stuff. And you'll hear this from people in all areas of life. Bite off little chunks. If you're doing a 5-minute speech, spend some, just decide one day, and let's say you've got 2 weeks to get ready. So let's say for this class, I assign a speech and you have 2 weeks to get ready. And so I tell you, all right, you've got 2 weeks, and you say, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? So spend half an hour one day thinking about what am I going to talk about, or however long it takes. Maybe it takes you 10 minutes. I'm going to talk about, this. I'm going to talk about why wearing glasses is not as good for you as wearing contact lenses. That's going to be my topic, and I'm going to give a speech on that. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just making this up, but you get the point. So then you've spent a few minutes thinking about the topic, and then you take a few minutes to think, okay, what would this look like? How would I want to? And then brainstorm for ideas and so forth, right? It's a good way to avoid procrastination. Then stop. Give yourself the 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 30, whatever, and then just stop and put it aside. But you know what? Okay, I'm done with that for the day. I'm going to move on and do other things I need to do, and then I'll come back to it tomorrow. And then if you do that, what you will find is that as you suddenly you've got a week has gone by and you spent 20, 30, 15, 20, 30, whatever, however many minutes a day you've spent on it. Suddenly you look at it and go, wow, I've got a whole outline ready. And you're thinking, wow, where did that come from? Well, because you didn't overwhelm yourself. Students tend to procrastinate. That's just human nature. Don't look. One of the best ways to avoid it is little chunks. Overconfident people tend to ignore constructive and valid criticism, and that doesn't help because people may have valid reasons to say, hey, you need this. My experience with people who are overconfident is that they are typically not as well organized. Their speeches are not organized, and that's a problem. Overconcerned people tend to see valid criticism, and I guess I should have put valid criticism, critique. They see it as rejection, and it overwhelms them. Oh no, I knew I blew that speech, and really it's not that you blew the speech. It's just, hey, here's some things maybe you should work on. Well, that's a whole different story than you blew the speech, right? Last thing, those who are overconfident tend to be blind to bad habits, and they just won't fix them no matter what. And those who are overconcerned tend to think change is impossible. Neither is a good thing. You can change. I've witnessed students who at the beginning of class, I really did think they were going to throw up. They didn't, but I really thought they might. And I've even had one student one time, his first speech, he couldn't get through it. I mean, he got part of the way through and he just had to quit. And that, but by the end of the year, the final speech, even though it was long, he got through it. And he got through the whole thing. And I will tell you, quite candidly, it wasn't the greatest speech I've ever heard. But here's the thing. For him, he'd made enormous strides. I was so pleased with him and so happy for him. So he recognized, I can do this. Look, let me let you in on a little secret. Learning to be a good public speaker is much more about what you're willing to learn and whether you're willing to apply things to your public speaking than it is about whether you have some innate quality about you. Yes, some people have a certain charisma, a certain flamboyance, a certain personality, a certain even speaking ability that makes it a little easier for them to be a public speaker, but they still have to work at it. And I don't care who you talk to. The greatest person you've ever heard speak in public, whoever that person might be, the best public speaker you think you've ever heard, trust me when I tell you, that person will say, yeah, I've spent a lot of time practicing. And I'm trying to be really organized, and I try to keep things moving, and and you'll hear that. So trust me when I tell you you can do it if you just apply yourself. It's up to you, though, of course, how much you apply yourself and how much you don't. Let's tend towards the middle of being confident but concerned, or concerned but confident, whichever one you tend to veer towards. You start there. If you're the over-concerned type, let's be concerned, but let's be confident because we've prepared and we've gotten organized. If you're overconfident, let's have a little concern that maybe I need to spend a little more time being prepared and organized. Here's my basic verbal communication little paradigm I've made up. And again, you'll see this frequently throughout the class. I will pop the screen back up and say, remember this. The basic idea, right? You've got an idea in your brain. It's going to come out. You're going to get it into your mouth. You have to get the thought, right, to get into your mouth and all the air. And you've got to do the things you need to do to get that air out of your lungs and so forth, right? You're going to get it out of your mouth into the other person's ear, and then hopefully from their ear to their brain. And that's the goal, right? The ultimate goal is you're getting an idea, from your brain to their brain. Are you nervous about communicating? Do you have some apprehension? I have apprehension about cell phones because I don't know a lot about them, and it makes me nervous sometimes when I don't. I'm less nervous now than I used to be because I've used them more. But at first, boy, I remember, especially when smartphones started becoming ubiquitous, that really was nerve-wracking for me. Didn't like it, but I got used to it. So if you're already nervous, what do you do? All right, let's talk about it. 1, pray. If you are a Christian, pray. And I don't mean just at the moment before you go out to speak that you pray and you go, oh, Lord, help me, although that's not always a bad prayer. I'm talking about you pray in advance. What am I going to talk about? Why am I going to talk about it? What's motivating me to want to talk about this topic? And then pray about God, give me insight, give me resources to use, give me thoughts that are helpful and meaningful to the audience. Okay, pray for all those things. God does care. Okay, 2nd, preparation. Again, we're going to talk a lot about organization. So I'm just going to say this, and I'm going to say it repeatedly. Remember my saying, repetition is good pedagogy. You've got to be prepared. It will cover a multitude of sins, as the old saying goes. Being prepared will help you immensely, even if you are not the most outgoing, the most, you're just not the kind of person who's loquacious. You are not likely to be the life of the party. Well, so what? If you are prepared, your speech will go much better. And in fact, I will tell you this, you don't have to be the most dynamic speaker if you have a really good presentation and it's well prepared and thoughtful and organized. Your delivery is a lot less important than those things. Just telling you from experience, both as a teacher and as a speech maker. Last thing, exercise. Now that one might throw you for a bit of a loop. You say, what does that have to do with anything? Well, I'm not suggesting that you go out and decide, hey, I need to become a physical fitness buff. That's not my point. My point is that a little bit of exercise goes a long way for public speaking, mostly because it involves getting air out of your lungs, right? And you have to be able to do that. And so, and the other thing is most public speaking involves you standing. And so you have to stand up and you have to, and you move around a little bit. And so sometimes you might have to stand long periods of time. And you can't do that if you're in terrible physical condition. And so it helps you to get a little bit of exercise and make sure that your physical fitness it doesn't have to be superb, but try to help yourself by being physically fit. And believe me, it will make a big difference. Okay, here's some final thoughts on this. A, nobody else knows what you're going to say. So if you mess up, they don't know. And particularly if you skip over a minor detail, you're not likely, by the way, to skip over major things. You're going to have your outline, and it's going to have in bold, point 1 and point 2 and point 3. And then maybe you have some details under 1, 2, and 3. And maybe you skip over little c in point number 1. Well, Guess what? There's a reason that was little c and not point 1. It's a detail. And don't do this to yourself. Don't realize after you're halfway through point 2 that you didn't mention little c. Just forget it. Move on. Okay? Particularly if it's not going to ruin the whole effect of your speech, and if it's point little c, in other words, if it's a detail, it shouldn't crush your speech. And if it does, then it should have been a major point. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So keep that in mind. Don't worry about it. If you miss words that you intended to say, move on. The reason I say that is, again, people don't know. They don't know you've messed up. And if you don't let them know you've messed up, then they'll never know you messed up. Prepare diligently but effectively. Okay, I'm going to, again, there we go, saying it again, right? Let me tell you a very short story. I had a client one time years and years and years ago. It's when I was a very young lawyer. He wanted me to give him a script of questions and answers. And I did it because I was a young lawyer, and I thought, well, if that's what he wants, he's the client. And it was dumb because at trial, when I was having him testify, I asked him something a little bit different than what he was expecting, and it threw him for a loop. Well, the same thing in public speaking, okay? Don't tie yourself down to a script. In other words, I will be candid with you. I know sometimes for contests, you have to do what's called a memorized speech. You're not allowed any notes. You have to just do it from memory. And that's not bad, trust me. I mean, I've done lots of memorized speeches. But I never tied myself down to a script. In other words, I never memorized a script. I never memorized it line for line. In other words, I wasn't memorizing a scene from a Shakespeare play. Out, out, brief candle, life is but a poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Well, I learned that in high school, in 12th grade. I never forgot it, obviously. It's been a long time. It was 40 years ago. And I still remember that. Well, the reason I remember that is because I pounded it into my brain. Okay, well, that's fine. That's great. But you don't have to do that. Okay, that's why you have notes. Okay, and look, you will see people who get up on a stage and just give a speech or watch a TED Talk or something, and you're like, wow, look at that. That guy just got up there and he's memorized a speech. No, they haven't. Those people have given that same speech 52 times. And they are professionals, and they have done lots of other public speaking. That's why they do that. And let me assure you, if you watched every time they gave that speech, it's going to be a little bit different every single time because they have not memorized a script. They have the points in their head, the big points, and maybe some of their examples are memorized. But a lot of the rest of it is just flowing out because it's what they know, okay? So prepare diligently. Don't tie yourself down to a script. The biggest reason, finally, that you don't, and I know I'm on number 2, but the biggest reason, finally, you don't want to tie yourself down to a script is if you forget a line, you're going to blow it, and you're going to gag. Okay, I don't mean physically, but I mean you're going to gag the speech. You're going to, and there's going to be that, oh no, and then you're trying to think, and now you've got 2 minutes of you hemming and hawing and umming and oohing and ahhing and whatever you're doing, and it just ruins the effect of the speech. If you don't tie yourself down to a script, you're never going to find yourself in a position of skipping a line or missing a line and then ruining it for yourself. So don't. That's my advice. Don't do it. Don't memorize a script. You're not perfect, and neither is the audience. And guess what? Here's the thing. Your audience is almost always rooting for you. And so don't worry about it. If you flub up a little bit, just keep going. And in fact, maybe if you flub up, you say, good golly, I took that speech class and Mr. Nelson still didn't fix me. I mean, you make a little joke out of it or something. If you're that kind, again, if you're that kind of person, if you're not a humorous person, don't do that. Just move on. Okay, just move on. And just keep in mind that if there's some obnoxious person in the audience who's going to be a jerk, guess what? Nobody else is going to like that. And there'll be social pressure on that person to cut it out. Okay, so don't never let the one obnoxious person fluster you or flummox you if they're out there. Okay, Just you keep moving on, because like I said, most of the time the social pressure is people who are there to hear a speech want to hear a good speech, and they're rooting for you to do a good speech because they've got something invested in it, mainly their time, and their time is valuable. Don't use silly tricks to psych yourself up, because you're just going to psych yourself out. Please, 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 please do not go buy a book of the 10 ways you can psych yourself up to give a speech and then try to use those. You know, beat yourself on the chest before you do the speech. Well, I mean, okay, but that's just dumb, okay? Preparation, thoughtfulness, playing to your strengths, minimizing your weaknesses, those are things you do to do a good speech. Psyching yourself up is just going to psych yourself out. Don't do it. And last, if you're a Christian, I can do all things because of Christ who's in me. That's in the Bible. It says so. So there you go. All right. Well, so there we have it. And that gets you through that section there of our second speech class. So I will hopefully see you soon, and we will try to keep rolling as best we can with the technology, and hopefully knock it out so that we don't have to do these anymore.